Hello, I'm June Scobee Rodgers with the podcast Coffee with June. So good to have you back again, and I am excited to introduce you to another guest. Jean Becker is a great, famous author of books and has written a new book, Character Matters, and I want her to tell you all about it. But before that, let me tell you about her, a little bit about her. She was a USA Today reporter at the time of the Challenger space shuttle accident. She eventually began to work for Barbara and George Bush, George H.W. Bush, and she was his chief of staff. I tease her that she has been both a Democrat and a Republican, so she votes for the best person, guys. And with that, I'd like to have you meet Jean Becker. And Jean, tell us more about yourself.
Well, first of all, it's very exciting to be here with you in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Great city. I've always have loved this town. So I grew up in Missouri. I grew up on a farm in Missouri. My father never graduated from high school, but was one of the smartest people I knew. Just a great guy. And there are times, June, when I think about my graduating class. High school graduating class was 57 kids. I was valedictorian. It wasn't that hard. And there were times in my career when I worked at the White House as one of Barbara Bush's deputy press secretaries, and then traveling the world with George H.W. Bush, I would scratch my head and think, how did I go from a town of 311 in mid-Missouri to this? So I've had a great, blessed life.
Aw. Well, you've written many, many books, but the one that we'd like to talk about today is
Character Matters.
Character Matters, and it's lessons from George H.W. Bush.
Mm-hmm.
And when I first was asked to write a bit about it, I was curious about who the other people were. When I received my book that she had endorsed or autographed, I started looking through it to see where my bit was, and it's way back in the back. And I thought, oh, well, everybody else was more important. And then I realized it's all alphabetically placed.
Thank you. It's alphabetically placed.
And so Scobee or Rodgers are at the back of the alphabet.
Plus, you're in the Friends chapter. You're in the Friends chapter, which is toward the back. There's 154 essays in the book. Mm. So, which is exciting. But my editor asked me to write the book. I had written a book called The Man I Knew about the 25 years I was his chief of staff. It did really well. It hit the New York Times bestseller list. So my editor wanted me to write another book. And I had some great ideas, I thought. And he said, no, I want you to write another book about President Bush. I don't think we're done with him. I said, Sean, his name was Sean Desmond, you do remember he died at the end of the last book. And he said, I think we have a lot to learn from him. Life lessons. He left us a blueprint how to live a life well lived. So out of that lunch conversation in New York City came Character Matters.
Yes.
And I reached out to the people who knew him and loved him the best. And the essays, it asked them to write an essay. And it's everybody from former prime ministers, John Major of Great Britain, Brian Mulroney of Canada, who wrote something for me before he died. People who used to work for him, Bob Gates, Condi Rice, Secretary James Baker wrote the foreword, Dan Quayle wrote the epilogue, and everybody in between, from Reba McEntire and Dana Carvey to the young man who mowed the yard at their house, to June Scobee Rodgers.
Just June.
Just June.
Well, Vice President Cheney in the book, yes, he said that President Bush was the most understated president ever. Can you tell us what he meant by that?
President Bush, probably the best example is, well, first of all, just in general, President Bush was not someone, he didn't need to take credit. He didn't beat his chest. And, the last thing he was a braggart. And probably the best example is the day the Berlin Wall fell, which was a huge deal. And the media was harassing President Bush about how not only did he stay calm, he just sort of seemed, oh, yeah, it's great. A couple of Democratic leaders in Congress thought he should go to Berlin and literally dance on the wall. Well, what we have since discovered, as classified papers were declassified, the big concern was that Mikhail Gorbachev was in trouble. And of course, eventually he did get overthrown. But that the right-wingers in Russia would march, then the Soviet Union would march into East Germany and take over and stop it, and put a stop to it, throw Gorbachev out and put a stop to it by force. And President Bush knew that. He knew that Gorbachev was in trouble, and that any bragging, any victory dances, he wanted to keep it very low key. And he was right. And as a result, nothing happened. And eventually East Germany and West Germany reunited. But that's what Vice President Cheney, who was his Secretary of Defense, was talking about.
He was understated for certain, with having accomplished so many things in his as Vice President and President. He was talking with me at one time, and I said, you don't take credit for anything. Your staff told me that they have a hard time trying to explain what you're doing or to quote you in any way because they can't use the word I.
Right.
You always insist on the word we. So what a humble man. In fact, so much of his characteristics are like the Medal of Honor. We have the National Medal of Honor Center here in Chattanooga, and their characteristics are very similar. A lot of patriotism, courage, humble, very, very intriguing people who are modest. They don't need to have the light shine on just them.
It's a wonderful trait that I hope we can get back to. Modesty is a wonderful thing. President Bush used to crack me up. He never figured out that he was, most of the time, the most important person in the room. And he was the person in the room that everybody wanted to talk to, wanted to have their picture taken. And I can't tell you how many times I would be with him and he would say, oh my gosh, Jean, over there's George Clooney. As like, oh, okay. What? Oh, George Clooney. I was excited. But he never figured out. I used to tease him how he would get excited to meet celebrities. He never realized that he was one.
He was one.
You are a celebrity, sir.
Well, so many people in your book talk about the advice that they learned from him. Some of the reporters especially learned that he always forgave and moved on. If they did a negative story about him, they'd eventually apologize, and he'd say, that's okay, we moved on. That's just fine. He was also very much involved with the Challenger space shuttle flight. He had announced that the school teacher was going to fly, Krista McAuliffe, on a mission, and my husband was the commander of that mission. He was so kind to all the families of the lost astronauts. And at one point, we had decided to remember the crew by building a Challenger Center in Houston. And he said, June, no. Why are you building this? Because Houston's grieving, the astronauts are grieving, the whole nation's grieving. You need to have this all over the country. Come to Washington and set up your headquarters there. And I said, and he said, and you need to improve your board. Right now, you just have Houston people on your board of directors. He said, you need to have CEOs of aerospace companies. You need senators. You need these folks. And I said, I'm a school teacher. I don't know these people. And he said, come to Washington, I'll introduce you. And he went on and on about how I could improve the learning centers, have them nationwide, and how it would help everyone to participate in a Challenger Center. He was so generous with his kindness and advice, just simple advice that made all the difference in the world.
And then you took the ball and ran with it. And he, one of the things, and I think this relates to you and the Challenger Centers, a couple of people have asked me while talking about Character Matters, was there anything I learned about him that I didn't know? And I'm embarrassed to say I was his chief of staff for 25 years. I'm embarrassed to say, yes. There's one huge thing I learned. President Bush was a man ahead of his time on how he treated women in the workplace. And I knew how he treated me. I knew that he respected me. He respected my advice. He was really good about, he would listen to, if felt free to disagree with him, and he would respect that. What I didn't understand until the essays started coming in for this book, you're really referring to Maureen Dowd's essay when you're talking about reporters who wrote about that he would forgive them. But Maureen writes about this. Condi Rice definitely writes about this. She was a young black woman from Stanford University when she joined his White House national security team, and she wrote a very moving essay about how he went out of his way to introduce her to Mikhail Gorbachev at their very first meeting, drew her out of the back of the pack and said, this is Dr. Condoleezza Rice. She's my Soviet expert. I listen to everything she says. And Condi said in her essay, there's a lot written about how do you empower women, how do you empower black women. She said, that's how you do it. You don't talk about it, you just do it. But there's about 5 essays in the book written by women, and you have to read the book. I'm not going to tell your wonderful viewers and listeners all the stories. You got to read the book. But I think what you're talking about, he wanted to empower you. You said, I'm just a school teacher. And basically what he said to you, you got this. And he gave you a blueprint, and then you hit a home run with it.
Well, not only advice, but he wrote a personal check to help us get started. So you had many of the essays were your request, and then they accepted. Was there one that surprised you that they responded more than others?
That's actually probably Reba McEntire. So I sent out an email, which is probably, I'm not on social media. I'd probably be kicked off social media if I were, because I can get a little testy at times. But as you know, because you're on it, I have an email, I call it my email blast, that goes out to about 800 people. And it's Bush family, friends, my family and friends. It's just 800 people that I email stuff to. And when I was doing Character Matters, I sent out an email to that group. I can't remember who's on that email anymore, to say, do you have a story about something you learned from George Bush? And the usual suspects replied. I was surprised to hear from Reba and Dana Carvey. I forgot they were on the email. And both of them emailed and said, we would like to submit a story. I'm like, okay.
Nice.
I would love a story from you. Sally Struthers would be another. So that was just sort of fun to have that celebrity factor.
Is there one that stands out more than the others to you, personally to you?
One of the funny essays in the book, there's a lot of essays that are very, very serious. Yes. And again, about how his leadership, we need his voice more than ever today, how his humbleness, his honesty, he really was an amazing leader. But one of my favorite essays in the book was written by one of Barbara Bush's aides, who was helping answer the phones in the office one day. We have 4 lines, and we had 4 lines on the office phone. The first line rings, and it's Colin Powell asking to speak to President Bush.
A general.
General Colin Powell. Before she could put him through, the second line rings, and it would be Secretary James A. Baker III calling to talk to President Bush. Then the third line rings, and it would be the governor of Texas who just happened to be George W. Bush at the time. So Kara's looking at these 3 blinking lines, and she's about ready to run into his office to say, "Who do you want first?" When sure enough, the 4th line rings, and it's Barbara Bush. And she tells Mrs. Bush, who was her boss, she said, here's what's going on. Just hold on. So she runs to the office and says, "Oh my gosh, sir, you have Colin Powell, James Baker, George W., Governor Bush, and your wife are all on the line. Who do you want first?" And without hesitation, George H.W. Bush said, "Put my wife through first and tell the others I'll call him back." He was a very smart man.
Very smart man.
I love telling that story because it's so him that he immediately got, I'll talk to my wife first. The governor, Baker, Colin Powell, they could wait.
Happy wife, happy life, he said one time.
You asked me about my favorite essays. Some of my favorite parts of the book, there's one whole chapter that's his voice. Mm-hmm. And I did speeches.
Oh, yes.
That he gave, letters he wrote, and some of his diary entries. And one of my favorite diary entries, I found this. Let's see if I can find it quickly. It's what he wrote in his diary the night he lost the election to Bill Clinton. So one of the worst nights of his life. Mm-hmm. And what I love about, I'm going to read it, it's very short. And what I love about this diary entry, it's just so classy. And it's him giving himself advice.
Yeah. Okay.
So this is what he wrote. It's 12:15 in the morning, November 4th. The election is over. It is come and gone. It's hard to describe the emotions of something like this. The job is not finished, and that kills me. Now into bed, prepared to face tomorrow. Be strong, be kind, be generous of spirit, be understanding, and let people know how grateful you are. Don't get even. Comfort the ones I've hurt and let down. Say your prayers and ask for God's understanding and strength. Finish with a smile and some gusto, and do what's right and finish strong.
Beautiful words.
Beautiful. Written by someone whose heart has just been broken. Mm-hmm. As he once told someone, there was a young man in Kennebunkport, Maine, who had just been fired from his job. And he was really struggling. It was a hospitality job. He'd been fired from one of the bigger hotels in Kennebunkport, Maine. And he's crying on President Bush's shoulder. And he said to President Bush, "You have no idea how difficult this is. I can't even go out in public. I'm so embarrassed because everybody in town knows I was fired." And I look at President Bush. I think he counted to 10. And he said, "Rich, I was fired by the American people. I know how you feel. Everyone in the world knew I was fired." And he basically, you know what he told him? Pull up your big boy pants, get over it, get back out there. But when I read that diary entry, this was someone who'd just been fired by the American people. And that's what he wrote in his diary that night. It just says everything about him.
Yes, it
and
does.
Who he was.
Well, I appreciate so much your coming to Chattanooga. And this afternoon, you'll be speaking at the National Medal of Honor Heritage Center. Anything in particular you want to talk about when you're over there? And signing your book.
And signing my book. I was honored to be invited to speak at the Medal of Honor Heritage Center. Such an honor. One of the things I talk about in my talks is that one of the great perks of working for George Bush are all the people I've met. And everybody from Princess Diana to met Queen Elizabeth once. Mikhail Gorbachev once told me to shut up, which I'm oddly proud of. And Tom Selleck once kissed me right here. Yeah, I know. But that would include meeting you. And it would include getting to go to places. I mean, the Gene Beckers of the world don't get to speak at places like the Medal of Honor Heritage Center. And what an honor for me to be able to do that. So what I really want to talk about this afternoon is to focus on his World War II experience and how it shaped him. He lived his entire life. He was shot down when he was 20 years old, and both of his crew members died. Neither one of them survived. And it was a huge influence on how he lived the rest of his life. And that's what I want to focus on. Because I feel like it's something that every Medal of Honor winner and their families and people who study them and come to the museum, it's all, they have so many things in common. Courage, character,
leadership,
and a servant's heart. President Bush was a big believer that you have to give back. He had such a servant's heart. And certainly all the Medal of Honor winners had a servant's heart.
Well, was he ever invited to be a recipient of a Medal of Honor?
I don't think so. Not that I know of. He got the Distinguished Flying Cross. President Obama gave him the Medal of Freedom, but I do not.
Yes.
He got the Medal of Freedom. So he probably would tell you he did not deserve the Medal of Honor. He would not think he was deserving of that.
Well, it has been wonderful talking with you. Usually I'm on the other end answering the questions. This is not, doesn't come easy for me. But is there anything else that you would like to share that I haven't asked you about?
Just again, that working for him was one of the great, great privileges of my life. And I wish I had time to tell the George Clooney story. I did meet George Clooney. He did not kiss me. But I did have an interesting conversation with him. But it's just, I feel like the fact that I was able for the last 25 years of his life, he's, again, had such a servant's heart. He and President Clinton raised hundreds of millions of dollars in disaster relief for this country. Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Ike, Hurricane Harvey. And it was just a privilege to be a part of that. And one of the gifts he gave me was so many great stories to tell. And do you want me to tell one of my favorites? Do we have time?
Of course. I want to hear it.
So this is just classic George Bush. It's 2012. And I get a phone call one night from a woman who used to work for James Becker at the State Department. And she wanted to know if I'd heard the rumors that Prince Bandar had been assassinated. Prince Bandar was the ambassador from Saudi Arabia to the United States for 30 years and was very close to President Bush. He had been the ambassador during Desert Storm. And Margaret said Assad of Syria, the recently deposed Assad, hated Bandar. And she said he hasn't been seen in public for months. And do you know anything? Well, no, I did not know anything about this. This isn't the kind of gossip I normally heard, but what she wanted me to do was to call the CIA. And because President Bush was head of the CIA in the 1970s, we always had a CIA officer assigned to him to answer his questions, they kept him in the loop. I had classified clearance while he was chief of staff. So I said, well, let me find out. So I called the CIA, and the woman I talked to said, we don't know for sure. We have boots on the ground. We're afraid it's true because no one has seen him. And she said, don't tell him. Give us another 48 hours to see if we can confirm whether or not Bandar is dead. Well, the next day, Margaret called me and said that the French press had just announced that Bandar had been assassinated by Assad. Mm-hmm. And she said, you need to tell him right now, because if you don't, he's going to hear it on CNN. And he needs to hear it from you. Yeah. So it was really hard. I told him, and we were sitting outside in Kennebunkport, and there was a phone between us. He had returned a couple of calls that I gave him to return. And he looked at me and he said, did you try calling Bandar? Well, the answer to that would be no. I had not tried calling Prince Bandar. And President Bush said, let's try to get him on the phone. So I hollered in the window to his young aide, Jim Appleby, and I said, Jimmy, could you see if you can get Prince Bandar on the phone? And Jimmy leans out the window and said, did you tell him? I'm like, just see if you can get him on the phone. Well, 10 seconds later, he leans out the window and says, Prince Bandar on line 1. And President Bush picks up the phone and says, "Hey, Bandar. Hey, man, are you dead or alive? Everybody here thinks you're dead." Uh-huh, uh-huh. And then he looked at me and said, "He's alive." I'm like, "Yeah, I got that." And Bandar tells him that Assad was trying to kill him. And by the way, Bandar's still alive today. Bandar says, "Assad's trying to kill me. He's not going to find me. Don't worry about it. I got this." And President Bush says, "Well, I'm really glad that I got you on the phone. And can I tell everyone you're alive?" He says, "Well, don't announce it to the whole world, if Assad thinks I'm dead." So President Bush gets off the phone. He was so proud of himself. And he said, "Now, Jean, this is a good life lesson for you." I put it in the book, by the way. If there's confusion about whether someone's dead or alive, you call them.
Yeah.
And if they're alive, if they answer the phone, they're alive. Okay. He has a good point. And I swear to God, before I die, I'm determined to do that. I have yet to have the excuse to call somebody and say, "Are you dead or alive?" So President Bush said, "Who all thinks he's dead?" And I said, "James Baker and Brent Scowcroft, his two major foreign policy advisors. Let's get them on the phone. Let's tell them he's alive." So then Secretary Baker called me back and he said, "What the hell phone number does he have for Bandar that Bandar answered the phone?" Secretary Baker I love him, but he's intimidating. And I had to say, "I can't give you that phone number, sir. I'm so sorry." And then President Bush was sitting there and he said, "Give Baker the phone number." So then Baker called him. But is that not a great story? And just to put a little interesting twist on it, a couple hours later, the CIA called me back. I felt bad I didn't call her. And she said, "We think he's dead. We haven't been able to, we don't know for sure, but I think you better go ahead and tell him." So I took a deep breath and I said, "Yeah, he's alive." She said, "And you know that how?" And I told her, and she said, "Oh my God, we need to put that man back on payroll." But a couple of months later, it was a front page story in the New York Times. The whole mystery of Bandar's disappearance and why Syria hated him. And it included the phone call with President Bush. And President Bush saw it and he said, "Jean Becker, did you leak this?" I said, "Absolutely not." So he called Secretary Baker and Brent. He was determined to find the leak. Guess who leaked it? The CIA. And I asked the analyst, "Why? Why did you leak that?" She says, "We had our reasons." So I reported back to President Bush that it was a CIA leak. And he went, "Oh, got it. I get it." And he wouldn't tell me. Isn't that a great story, though?
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Just pick up the phone and call them.
Just pick up the phone and call them.
Joining us here today is David Curry, the president and CEO of the National Medal of Honor Center. And he is going to be your host this afternoon when you speak and sign your books at the Medal of Honor Center.
I'm excited. And if we have time, I'm going to tell the Prince Bandar story. Do you think the people at the center will enjoy the Prince Bandar story?
I know they will.
Yeah.
No, of course.
It's a great life lesson. If you don't know if someone's dead or alive, call them.
Based on the Challenger story about the loss of the Challenger crew, how do you think President Bush handled tragedy?
He really was amazing watching him. He was always willing. A lot of people run away from tragedy. A lot of people don't know what to say after tragedy or what to do. That was not him. And I sometimes wonder if that came from being shot down and losing his two crew members. But as you know, he was very hands-on with the Challenger families, wanted to be there for you,
Yes.
wanted to support you. When Columbia blew up, all those years later, the shuttle Columbia blew up after reentry. and blew up over Texas, we went to the Johnson Space Center in Houston the next day. Just to walk. He just wanted to go. He went to Mission Control. He went to hug them, to encourage. He just wanted to be there for them. I'm gonna cry. It was so emotional, and we didn't tell the press. It was all completely under the radar. He just wanted to be there for them. And I watched him. They lost a daughter to leukemia when she was 3 years old in 1954. And he knew, which broke their heart, of course. But what was the Bush's reaction to that? They raised hundreds of millions of dollars for cancer research. Were very active in cancer. They founded a national group called the CEO Roundtable and the National Dialogue on Cancer. And just before Christmas, someone who I met through their cancer work emailed me and sent me an email to send to their 5 kids, George W., Jeb, Marvin, Neil, and Doro. Their sister Robin today would not die from her leukemia. They have found a cure. I got that email Christmas Eve, and I just sent it to them, the 5 Bush kids. It's so funny to call them kids. It's the former president, former governor. I sent it to them just this week. I waited till after the holidays, and their reaction was huge. They loved knowing that. I'm so grateful to Marty for telling me. But again, he took one of the most tragic things that ever happened to him and raised money, organized research groups, and now his other Robins will not die from leukemia. So that was his reaction to tragedy, is you have to put your best foot forward and try to figure out how to make sure it doesn't happen again.
So he embraced it.
He embraced it.
And that's why he was so, maybe one of the reasons why he was so helpful to the Challenger family.
I think so.
And creating the Challenger Center in the memory of that.
That's exactly what you did. You did what he would have done.
Yes.
And he wanted to be helpful to you. Rather than go home and get into bed and pull the covers over your head, you founded the Challenger Centers.
Yes.
And that is something that George Bush believed in and admired, and it's how he reacted to tragedy.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you for sharing that story. Very touching. What does the legacy of President Bush tell us about how to be a good politician, a good leader, and especially in leading the country?
I really hope young people will read this book, will read Character Matters. I'm very grateful. I've been doing a ton of events at colleges and even high schools. And the kids have been amazing. They have great questions, and they line up to ask me questions. But our country we're so divisive right now. And one of the things they can learn, you learn a lot from history. History is so important, and let's face it, George H.W. Bush is now part of our history. And one of the things you can learn from his history, 2 things stand out. The 1990 budget deal, in which he compromised with the Democrats in Congress and signed a budget. It bounced the budget. That budget deal is now credited with the economic boom of the 1990s. But in order to reach that deal, he had to compromise. He had to raise taxes, not very much, and return the Democrats in Congress cut expenses. And the word compromise has become a dirty word, and that's not right. Compromise is important. And President Bush wrote in his diary at one point, this was another diary entry, it actually made big news. John Meacham, historian John Meacham, is the one who found this diary entry when we gave him his diaries to research President Bush's life. He wrote in his diary, I probably made myself a one-term president today, but it's what's right for the country. How inspiring is that? And that's what we need for young people to understand, that you run for office not to become famous, not to become a celebrity, not to become powerful, but because you love your country. And they're out there. We just need to find them. The other great example is his unbelievable friendship with Bill Clinton. The 1992 election was not easy and it was not nice, and they were best friends by the time he died. Barbara Bush would tell you that her husband was the father Bill Clinton never had, and I do believe that. But we need to learn to, I used to listen to them argue politics, and then they would go play golf. They would talk about current events. I can remember sitting on the back porch at Walker's Point in Kennebunkport, and they were going at it over some current event. I can't remember. And then they went and played golf. That's the way it's supposed to be. Not this, it's either my way or the highway. It's, last night after President Biden gave his goodbye speech to the nation, and I'm listening to some of the commentary, and it was so predictable. Like nobody took the middle road. It was either brilliant or this was a disaster. Well, often the truth is in the middle, and we have forgotten that. And President Bush, that's why I'm glad my editor asked me to write the book, because Sean was right. He did leave us a blueprint on how to live a life well lived. And so I hope young people in particular will read it and be inspired, and hopefully be inspired to serve.
You're so right, and it would be great if in this country people would appreciate other people's opinion more. Mm-hmm. It is their opinion, and you have your own opinion, and let's move on and play golf.
And I have news for every single living human being. You're not always right. And there's so many people who think they're always right. Yeah. And the truth is often in the middle. Yeah. You've got to listen to what the other person says, and we'll get back there. We need to find the new George Bushes out there, some of whom are women. We need to find them.
Well said.
Yeah, absolutely.
You were there after the Challenger accident and event, and then the next thing we know, you're working for the Bushes, and you became the chief of staff for President Bush. How did that come about?
Accident. I'm an accident of being. I'm proof of being in the right place at the right time. So I was offered the job as Barbara Bush's deputy press secretary at the White House, and after he won the election in 1988, I had gotten to know both Barbara Bush and Kitty Dukakis. During the 88 campaign, they wrote a weekly column for USA Today, and I was their editor. And so I got to know both of them really well. And so that was sort of my road. They wanted, it's sort of a long story. I'm going to tell the USA Today version and not the New York Times version. They decided they needed someone with reporter's experience in the First Lady's press office. And they offered me the job, and I was stunned. So fast forward to, he lost the election. In 92, Mrs. Bush asked me to go back to Houston with them for 1 year to help her with her memoirs. So I put all my stuff in storage in D.C., moved to Houston, and I was getting ready to move. I was actually going to move to Chicago. I had a job at the Chicago Sun-Times. I was going to go back to being a reporter. And President Bush called me into his office. His first post-White House chief of staff had retired. And he said, I need to hire a new chief of staff. I really need to think this through. I'm just not sure what I need, who I need. Barr thinks you can maybe keep the seat warm. That's exactly what he said. Until I find a new chief of staff. And I said to him, no, sir, I've never been anyone's boss. I can barely bounce my bank account. I said, I don't know how to run an office. I don't know how to be a boss. I can't. I'm a writer. This isn't who I am. And he said, well, could you just do it for a couple months? This was March of 94. And he says, I promise you by Labor Day, I will have hired someone. And the big plus here would be spending the summer in Kennebunkport. By the time we come back from Kennebunkport back to Houston after the summer, you're free to go. I'm like, okay. And he says, we'll make it up as we go. We never talked about it again. We got busy. George and Jeb were both running for governors in their respective states, Texas and Florida. President Bush was coming out of his post-election malaise, maybe too strong of a word. He was hitting the ground running, and we never talked about it again. I was his chief of staff for 25 years. Now, actually, I lied. We did talk. I brought it up like 20 years later. I brought it up at lunch. And I said, do you remember what you said to me when I became your chief of staff? I said, for 20 years, I've lived in fear you're going to walk into my office and say, oh, Jean, I found a chief of staff. You're free to go. And he said, I don't remember that conversation. I said, yes, you're supposed to find a chief of staff by Labor Day, 1994. It was the best job in America. Having said that, in my book, The Man I Knew, there's an entire chapter called I Have an Idea.
Oh, yes.
It's the scariest words the man ever said to me. And sometimes it would be, do you want to get pizza for lunch? I'd be like, oh, thank God. And then other times it would be, I'm thinking about jumping out of airplanes. What? I want to go back to Chichijima. He had 100 ideas. But what a privilege to be his chief of staff. One of the great privileges of my life.
Oh, Jane, I've read your book throughout, and I've loved it. Other people listening to our podcast today may want to purchase it. Where do they go to buy your book?
Oh, I've never loved you more, June Scobee Rodgers. Thank you for asking me that question. Oh, look, and I magically have a copy of the book right here. It's hard to find in the book. It came out in April of 2024, so it's hard to find in the bookstores now. But you can buy it on bookshop.org, which will be through, I like to promote independent bookstores. I want them to stay alive and well. Bookshop.org, which will direct you to your local independent bookstore. You can buy it, it'll come in the mail, or of course, Amazon. And it's still selling well. The paperback comes out in June. But my publisher has been shocked how long of legs this book has had. Mm-hmm. And I think it's because of what's going on in our country right now. Mm-hmm. I am still doing, I could do a book event every week. I'm writing a new book. I'm on deadline for another book. But I'm not supposed to be traveling. I don't want my editor to know that I'm here. But this book, I still get invitations all the time to do Character Matters events. And I think this has really spoken to the heart of America. So yes, I would love to encourage everyone to take a look. And the good thing about it, and I'm going to quote Norma Major, Dame Norma Major, the wife of John Major, the former Prime Minister of Great Britain. She sent me a note to tell me it's by her bedside, and she reads one essay a night. Yeah. And that she loves reading it right before she goes to bed, and I just love that. And what's nice, it's an easy book to read. Mm-hmm. You know, sometimes when you read a piece of fiction and it's a murder mystery, and if you put it down for too long, you go back to reading it, and you're like, wait, who are these people? What did he do? This, you can just read one essay a night and move on.
Yeah. It's exciting.
So, thank you.
Yeah. And the picture of him with this fishing pole on the front. And there's one essay in there from, maybe it was a son who said he was driving along somewhere and saw a lake and wrote to him, I thought of you today. And it was for our son, is that right? For our son or grandson?
He wrote a note to his son Marvin.
Okay.
You have a good memory. He was campaigning in Iowa, and he and Marvin had just been fishing like the weekend before, yes. And he drove by a lake and said, Marvin, I was thinking about our great fishing trip. Yes. They asked me for an idea. I did a similar book about Mrs. Bush right after she died called Pearls of Wisdom. Yes. And it's with her, it wasn't life lessons. She was the biggest advice giver in the history of the world. And this was, I asked people, what advice did she give you? President Bush was more you learn by example and by watching him and listening to him. Barbara Bush would get in your face and say, June, why are you wearing that? No, she was just, it's a lovely outfit, by the way. So Pearls of Wisdom is a string of pearls. And my editor said, what should we put on the cover of Character Matters? Well, fishing is where I think he did a lot of thinking. It's where he could relax, and he loved fishing, and I do love this cover. It's him just enjoying life, enjoying the world.
Thank you so much for your personal stories about a really great man. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us today. We look forward to next time, and please join us.